What if the person everyone believed guilty had never actually committed the crime? What if the true mystery lay hidden in every forgotten detail of a dark case that remains unsolved to this day? Imagine a dense forest with tall trees and shadows that seem to hide secrets. It was there that a story of disappearance began, and that, decades later, still echoes like a disturbing enigma. A disappearance that left not only questions for the police and investigators, but also a deep scar on the life of a family that has never found peace. That night, no one imagined that the simple silence of the forest would become the setting for one of the most intriguing mysteries ever recorded. A young woman disappears, the search begins, and amid the unconnected clues, a figure emerges, the final suspect. A man who carried on his shoulders suspicious looks, veiled accusations, and the mark of perhaps being responsible for a crime never proven. But why, after all, was he never convicted? What secrets were hidden in this investigation that felt more like a jigsaw puzzle without enough pieces? Have you ever been there, hearing a story so mysterious that it feels like you're confronted with a buried secret? Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover may surprise you. This case isn't just about a person disappearing in the forest. It's about human failings, about fear, about contradictory versions that intertwine in a dangerous game of assumptions. It's about the eternal question, to what extent can we trust what seems obvious? As the investigation progressed, clues appeared and disappeared, as if the forest had swallowed every trace. Footprints that led nowhere, contradicting testimonies, and the constant weight of silence. In this scenario, the final suspect was singled out not only by the police, but also by public opinion. His gestures, his words, even his silences began to be seen as evidence of guilt. But was the truth really that simple? This is where the story becomes even more disturbing. Because when justice fails, when the evidence isn't sufficient, all that's left is doubt. And doubt is like a shadow that never disappears. With each detail revealed, the mystery seems to grow. And the most curious thing is that even after years, no one has been able to say for sure what really happened in that forest. And perhaps this is the most fascinating aspect of this case. It's not just a real crime or a mysterious disappearance. It's a narrative that stirs our deepest instinct to seek answers, to try to make sense of the inexplicable. Who was the last person to see the victim alive? What really happened that night? Why were the investigations so flawed? Questions that resonate to this day and have transformed this case into a veritable labyrinth of uncertainty. Now, imagine yourself in their shoes, living every day with a lack of answers, with doubt gnawing at every memory, and with the feeling that perhaps the culprit was still close by. What would it be like to live under that weight? This is the universe we'll explore together. A story that defies logic, that calls into question the credibility of the investigation, and that still sparks debate among experts in unsolved crimes. What if I told you that the final suspect might not be who you imagine? What follows will take you deeper into this forest mystery, into every clue, every flaw, and every silence that to this day keeps this case alive in the memory of those who dare to investigate it. Do you remember the last time you saw someone for the last time, only to find that person seemed to have simply disappeared from view? That feeling of emptiness, of not understanding what had happened, is the same feeling that gripped the residents of a small community surrounded by a vast forest when a young woman left her home and never returned. The case you're about to learn about begins precisely at that moment, the moment when everything seemed normal, but within hours would become one of the most mysterious disappearances ever recorded. That afternoon, the weather was normal. Nothing suggested anything strange would happen. The victim was completing her final tasks of the day, following a seemingly ordinary routine, until she was last seen on her way to the trail leading into the forest. Witnesses reported that she was walking alone, calmly, as if simply enjoying the natural surroundings. But that would be the last confirmed record of her presence. After that, there was no sign, no noise, no clue as to what might have happened. The emergency began in the early hours. Family members noticed her absence and raised the alarm. The forest was surrounded by intense searches, with teams of volunteers and police scouring the area for any detail. But nothing seemed to make sense. Have you ever felt like something was wrong, but couldn't find an explanation? That was exactly the feeling that gripped everyone involved. The disappearance quickly took on a mysterious tone. Cell phones were tracked, routes were reconstructed, and the young woman's every step was analyzed. What was discovered was that she had indeed reached the edge of the forest, but from then on, it was as if she had been swallowed by the silence and darkness of the trees. No personal belongings were found, no clear signs of a struggle, just emptiness. And the more days passed, the harder it became to understand how someone could disappear so suddenly in a known area of activity, leaving no trace. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover may surprise you. This disappearance wasn't just a run-of-the-mill case of someone getting lost. It's riddled with contradictions, hidden details, and differing versions that still baffle investigators and keep the question alive. What really happened in that forest? While family mourned her loss, police intensified their investigation. The last people who saw her alive were interviewed. A neighbor said she waved to her as she passed by on the road. A couple claimed to have seen her walking quickly just before entering the trail. A close friend reported that she had been unusually silent the day before. But despite all this information, nothing led to a conclusion. It was like putting together a puzzle with pieces that didn't fit, and time is cruel in these cases. In the first few days, every minute is vital. After a week, the chances diminish. After a month, hope mingles with anguish. And that's exactly what happened. As the days wore on, the community began to wonder if someone might have seen more than they were telling. Could the forest be hiding something beyond what met the eye? Could someone silently know more than they were revealing? This disappearance became one of the region's most talked about mysteries, not only because of the lack of clues, but also because of the gaps left in the investigation. With each testimony, a question arose. With each discarded clue, a new theory emerged. And so, the case of the missing young woman grew like a shadow, fueling the feeling that the truth was there, hidden but untouchable. And it's at this point that our story gains momentum. Because the disappearance is just the beginning. What comes next involves suspects, flawed investigations, and a final name that to this day sparks fear, curiosity, and outrage. Have you ever stopped to think about how an investigation can completely change course because of a single detail, a nearly invisible trace, a contradiction in a statement, or even a clue that suddenly disappears from the record? That's exactly what happened when the police began the search for a missing person in the forest. At first, everything seemed like a meticulous operation. Agents, sniffer dogs, volunteers, and journalists gathered, all determined to find quick answers. But amidst the organized chaos, something began to stand out. The first clues, instead of bringing clarity, plunged the case into an even denser fog. The opening scene of the investigation was almost cinematic. Helicopters hovered overhead, while dozens of police officers combed every trail. The sound of radios echoed through the trees, transmitting coordinates and instructions. Within hours, the previously silent forest was filled with footsteps, flashlights, and voices, desperately trying to find even the slightest sign of the victim. And indeed, they found some evidence. But was it real evidence, or just distractions created by the environment itself? Among the first finds was a handkerchief, partially buried under dry leaves. Family members swore it belonged to the victim, but there was a problem. No DNA evidence, no drops of blood, no sign that the object was directly linked to the disappearance. Soon after, footprints were recorded in a nearby area. Initially, it was believed they belonged to the young woman. However, forensic analysis raised doubts. The size was slightly different, and the damp ground may have distorted the prints. Were they really hers, or those of someone who had followed her to that point? Have you ever felt like the more you search for answers, the more questions arise? That's exactly what happened. With each clue uncovered, new theories emerged, some plausible, others completely disturbing. Witnesses began contradicting themselves. One said they saw the victim walking alone. Another claimed she was with someone. Who was telling the truth? Was someone trying to hide information? Or worse, was someone manipulating the investigation from the start? Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover may surprise you. As the investigation progressed, an uneasy feeling took hold. The evidence seemed to evaporate. Objects that could have been crucial mysteriously disappeared from the inquiry, while important reports simply weren't taken into account. The press began to question the police's efficiency. Experts in unsolved crimes began to point out gross flaws in the procedures. And amidst all this, a nagging doubt grew. Was the case being handled correctly, or were there hidden agendas preventing the truth from coming to light? The first theories began to emerge with force. Some believed the young woman had been the victim of an accident and that the relentless forest had swallowed up any trace. Others argued for the possibility of kidnapping, highlighting reports of suspicious cars driving through the area in the previous days. And there were still those who believed in something darker, the presence of someone close, someone known, who might have planned the whole thing to make it look like just another unexplained disappearance. The mystery only deepened. The deeper the police delved, the more it seemed the forest held secrets no one could decipher. With each page of research, the feeling was that answers were being replaced by new questions, as if someone were always one step ahead. And deep down, the community began to wonder if they really wanted to discover the truth, or if the truth was more frightening than silence itself. And it's precisely at this point that the story takes a turn. Because the investigation didn't stop at the first clues. What followed revealed even deeper contradictions, unexpected names, and a suspect whose innocence and guilt still divide opinions. Have you ever wondered what makes someone a suspect in a crime no one can prove? What if the person everyone points to as the culprit isn't exactly who they seem? In the case of the disappearance in the forest, the story takes on a new level of mystery when the final suspect emerges. The one whose name has been etched into the investigation and who, to this day, divides opinions between innocence and guilt. But who was he really? What was his relationship with the victim? And why has he ended up at the center of all attention? From the beginning, this man attracted attention. He wasn't a stranger to the community, but there was something about his demeanor that made neighbors hesitant to talk about him. Some said he was too reserved. Others remembered small details that in isolation would seem insignificant, but together they formed a disturbing picture. He had known the victim for a long time, had access to information that only someone close to him could have. And his statements, throughout the investigation, revealed more contradictions than clear answers. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover may surprise you. As the police began to analyze him more closely, strange behaviors emerged. Details that at first could be interpreted as common nervousness, but which, in the context of the disappearance, began to raise serious suspicions. He changed stories, forgot important facts, and at times seemed to avoid direct questions. All of this turned the case into a veritable psychological game, where every action or omission could be interpreted differently. But it's not just about suspicious behavior. The latest suspect had motives that, in the eyes of some investigators, could be plausible for such a serious crime. Troubled relationships, arguments with the victim close to the time of her disappearance, and a series of disturbing coincidences put his presence on the police's radar. Even so, nothing was enough to prove guilt. No direct physical evidence, no records that irrefutably linked him to the disappearance. And it is precisely this combination of proximity, strange behavior, and lack of concrete evidence that made the case so intriguing. Have you ever felt like the truth was right in front of you, but somehow it seemed out of reach? That was how the investigators felt. Each statement added layers to the mystery. Every detail of the suspect's past, every relationship he had with others in the community, Every small inconsistency in his narrative became a piece of the puzzle no one could complete. What makes this final suspect even more fascinating is that he's not your typical true crime villain. He's human, complex, with fears, ambitions, and behaviors that might go unnoticed if he weren't at the center of a case that shocked everyone. And that's precisely what sparks curiosity and tension. The audience begins to question whether we're judging by the evidence or simply by third-party perceptions and interpretations. And as the investigation progressed, experts in unsolved crimes began analyzing every movement, every phrase, every gesture of the latest suspect. Theories emerged about his possible motives, suspicions of a cover-up, and hypotheses ranging from accident to deliberate intent. All of this further heightened the air of mystery surrounding the disappearance in the forest, transforming the suspect into a figure simultaneously feared, questioned, and in some ways misunderstood. And it's at this point that our story deepens, because understanding the latest suspect isn't just about identifying a possible culprit. It's about delving into a web of secrets, contradictions, and doubts that to this day defies any attempt at a definitive answer. What follows will reveal even more about his life, his relationships, and the details that made him the central figure in one of the most enigmatic disappearance cases ever recorded. Have you ever wondered why some disappearance cases remain unsolved, even when the police seem to have all the resources to uncover the truth? In the case of the forest, the silence of the law has become almost as frightening as the mystery of the disappearance itself. The investigation, which began with such force, with teams, clues, and witnesses, ended up revealing flaws that no one could ignore. Documents disappeared, evidence was lost, and important accounts changed without explanation. And it is precisely at this point that doubt begins to take hold. Could the truth have been there all along, but no one wanted or was able to reach it? Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover may surprise you. At first, every police action seemed correct. There were protocols, systematic searches, testimony gathering, and leads tracking. But as the days passed, inconsistencies emerged that left even the most experienced investigators uneasy. An object that could have been decisive mysteriously disappeared from the investigation. One witness completely changed their story, providing details that had not been mentioned before. And another simply stopped cooperating, without apparent justification. The feeling that remained was that something was being hidden, or that the investigation itself didn't know where to go. Failures in the judicial process also contributed to deepening the mystery. Crucial documents were filed improperly. Evidence that could link the suspect to the victim was not analyzed in time, and forensic reports that could clarify contradictions were incomplete or contradictory. It's as if every step that should have led to the truth was replaced by invisible barriers, creating a labyrinth of uncertainty that still challenges investigators and the victim's family. Have you ever been there, trying to understand a case that seemed straightforward, but with every detail became impossible to decipher? That's exactly the feeling that hung over everyone involved. With each report submitted, more questions arose than answers, and what should have been a clear path became a series of dead ends. And the most intriguing thing is that, even with all the resources and experts at its disposal, the investigation seemed to stumble upon contradictions that no one could explain. The silence of the law is also reflected in judicial decisions that left significant gaps. Nothing seemed sufficient to convict or acquit the last suspect, and the system's limitations became evident. The lack of concrete evidence, combined with procedural errors, meant the case remained without a definitive conclusion. And it is precisely this inability to move forward that keeps the aura of mystery surrounding the disappearance in the forest alive. As family members awaited answers, frustration grew. The lack of transparency, missing evidence, and conflicting accounts left everyone with the same question: To what extent can we trust the justice system when someone's disappearance hinges on an investigation that seems more confusing than enlightening? And it's at this point that the story becomes even more intriguing, because we're not just talking about technical flaws or procedural mishaps. We're dealing with a case in which every error, every omission, every contradiction becomes another piece of the puzzle that keeps the mystery alive. What follows will further explore these gaps, revealing details that have made the disappearance continue to defy the logic and patience of all those who tried to uncover the truth. Have you ever imagined what it's like to live with the absence of answers, day after day, carrying in your chest the feeling that something essential has been lost forever? In the case of the disappearance in the forest, the impact wasn't limited to newspaper pages or police records. It lingered in the hearts of the family, in the lives of those who knew the victim, and even in the entire community that watched helplessly as this mystery unfolded. Their pain isn't measured solely by the length of time they've waited, but by the constant uncertainty, by the sense of injustice that grows with each detail that remains unclear. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover may surprise you. Each morning without news, each night without answers, transformed the disappearance into something much bigger than a simple true crime case or unsolved mystery. For the family, every lost glance around the house, every object that reminded her of the young woman's presence, carried with it the pain of not knowing if she was alive or if she'd become just another memory stored between sighs and tears. This human impact is what makes the case so disturbing, as it's not just about clues and suspects, but about the real lives of people who continue to suffer silently. The scars of this disappearance are visible in every gesture, in every silence, in every memory that insists on not being erased. Friends and relatives carry the burden of being unable to provide answers to questions they themselves wish they had never heard. The community, which had previously watched the investigation unfold with curiosity, began to understand firsthand how devastating it is to live with an unsolved crime. Each theory that emerged, each suspect that appeared in the headlines, brought no relief. It only reinforced the emptiness and the feeling that justice had failed to provide any form of comfort. Have you ever felt like the world around you was normal, while everything inside your home was silently falling apart? For the victim's family, the disappearance didn't end with the search or the partial closure of the investigation. Each new twist, each questionable piece of evidence or contradictory testimony only increased the pain and frustration. The feeling of injustice became a constant companion, reminding everyone that often the lack of answers weighs more heavily than the tragedy itself. And it's not just about individual suffering. The disappearance left its mark on the community, creating a climate of distrust, fear, and curiosity that spread like a shadow over the place. Everyone who knew the victim faced questions they couldn't answer. The silence of the law and the flaws in the investigation became symbols of collective frustration, reminding us that the truth isn't always attainable. Even when everyone believes they're doing their best to find it, the human impact of this case also reveals something essential about the true cost of unsolved crimes. They're not just numbers in reports or sensational headlines. Their lives forever changed, routines disrupted, dreams shattered, and the constant feeling that justice may never come. This invisible pain, unmeasured by evidence or suspects, is the one that remains most present, making every detail of the disappearance even more disturbing and important to remember. And it's precisely this emotional connection that keeps the audience attentive and engaged. Because understanding the impact of a real disappearance allows us to see the story from a different perspective, not just as an intriguing mystery, but as a human tragedy that deserves to be remembered, studied, and understood. What follows will delve even deeper into this reality, exploring the consequences, memories, and the scars the case left, a story that isn't limited to the crime itself, but that continues to live on in the lives of those left behind. Have you ever wondered how an unsolved mystery manages to remain vivid in people's memories, even years after it happened? In the case of the disappearance in the forest, all the clues, suspects, and investigations seem to have left more questions than answers. And at the center of this enigma is him, the final suspect, the one everyone pointed to, the one who sparked fear, suspicion, and endless theories. But was he truly guilty, or just another missing piece in this dark puzzle no one has been able to decipher? Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover may surprise you. When we think about unsolved crimes, we tend to look for simple explanations. One person is guilty, another is innocent, and everything fits together. But that's not always the case. In this case, the disappearance in the forest turned into something much bigger, a web of contradictions, flawed investigations, and conflicting testimonies that made the truth seem unattainable. Each emerging detail seemed to only deepen the fog that already shrouded the mystery, leaving everyone unsure of who to trust. The final suspect wasn't just a name on a police report. He was a complex human figure, shrouded in strange behavior and motivations no one could fully decipher. His actions, his words, and even his silences began to be interpreted differently by investigators, family members, and experts in unsolved crimes. Each gesture could be seen as evidence of guilt, or simply as the reaction of someone pressured by circumstances we don't fully understand. Have you ever been there? Trying to understand something that seemed so obvious, but that turned out to be increasingly confusing? The feeling of not having clear answers is precisely what kept the Forrest case alive in everyone's imagination. And it's this doubt, this constant uncertainty, that turns a disappearance into a long-lasting mystery. Because when justice fails, or when evidence disappears, or when witnesses contradict each other, the truth becomes a shadow, always visible, but impossible to fully grasp. And this is where the final reflection comes in, thinking about the disappearance, the final suspect, and every flaw that marked the investigation forces us to face something that goes beyond the crime itself. It makes us question the reliability of the clues, the interpretation of the evidence, and even the role each person involved played in this story. Was someone covering up the truth? Or was the truth simply lost amid human error, contradictions, and disturbing coincidences? The never-ending mystery of the disappearance in the forest isn't just about the victim or the suspect. It's about the scars the case left, the pain of those who waited for answers and never received them, and the persistent feeling that something essential was lost among the trees, trails, and silence. Every detail, every testimony, and every flaw in the process become pieces of this dark puzzle, defying logic and patience. And it's precisely at this point that you, the person following the story, become part of the mystery. Because the question remains, was the last suspect truly guilty? Or just another piece in a puzzle no one has been able to solve? What do you think about this? What's your theory? And as we ponder these questions, we remember that some mysteries remain alive precisely because they never end. What do you think? Was the final suspect guilty or innocent? Leave your opinion in the comments, subscribe to the channel, and share this video so more people can learn about this still unsolved story. And as we reflect on all these doubts, fears, and contradictions, it's important to remember that this story isn't limited to what's being told here. Every opinion, every feeling, and every question from those following the case helps keep the victim's memory alive and discuss the real impact of unsolved crimes. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below with what resonated with you most, or what your theory is about the final suspect. Sharing your ideas not only enriches the conversation, but also helps others look at the case with new eyes, creating a community of curious people and investigators who want to understand what happened in the forest. And if you feel this type of content deserves to continue being produced, a single like makes all the difference. Every click shows that there are people interested in delving deeper into these mysteries, who value true crime stories and unsolved disappearances, and who want to closely follow every detail and twist. It's your interaction that keeps the channel alive, allowing more cases to be investigated, narrated, and discussed with seriousness and empathy. Furthermore, subscribing to the channel is more than just following another profile. It's being part of a community that seeks to understand the inexplicable, reflect on injustices, and keep the memory of these cases alive. Each subscription helps reach people who might otherwise never have come across this story, bringing information, curiosity, and reflection further. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this type of content, ensuring that stories like the disappearance in the forest continue to be discussed, analyzed, and remembered. So, if you're touched by this case, want to share your thoughts, or simply support the continuation of this work, leave a comment, like the video, and subscribe. Every gesture counts, every opinion matters, and together we can keep the mystery alive, not just as an enigma, but as an opportunity for reflection, learning, and connection with stories that show us the most human and disturbing side of reality. And while we do this, the story continues, and the next chapter reveals even more layers of this case that no one has been able to solve, showing that behind every suspicion, every flaw in the investigation, and every silence of the law, there are marked lives, deep mysteries, and questions that still cry out for answers. Have you ever stopped to imagine how a seemingly ordinary place can hide mysteries spanning decades? The forest where it all happened wasn't just a landscape of tall trees and silent trails. It was almost like a character in its own right, capable of absorbing stories, swallowing details, and harboring secrets no one could fully understand. The disappearance that marked that place left not only physical traces, but an invisible shadow that lingers to this day over those involved in the case. Who was the last suspect? And why was he never convicted? These questions don't have easy answers, but they carry with them a complexity that goes far beyond the simple act of investigation. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what truly captures attention in these types of stories isn't just the disappearance itself, but everything surrounding it, the decisions made, the flaws in procedures, the contradictory testimonies, and most importantly, the impact this has on the mindset of those involved. Imagine yourself walking along that narrow trail, feeling the chill of the early morning, the sounds of nature, and at the same time, the weight of an unsettling silence that seems to hide something you'll never be able to fully see. It was in this climate that the investigation began, with teams trying to decipher clues that in practice seemed to disappear as quickly as they appeared. The forest, with its deep green and lengthening shadows, became a physical and psychological labyrinth. Every fallen trunk, every obscured path, every unexpected sound could be a clue or a deception. And that's precisely where human perception comes in, how our minds search for meaning even when everything around them defies logic. The investigators had to make quick decisions, interpret fragmented information, and deal with the pressure of expectations coming from all sides, desperate family members, the media, and the local community. But the further they delved, the more they realized that the truth might be hidden between the lines, in the contradictions, in details that seemed irrelevant at first glance. And it's fascinating to observe how, in cases like these, every decision made reverberates in unexpected ways. A minor error, a misinterpreted clue, a forgotten statement can completely alter the trajectory of an investigation. It's a true journey of analysis, reflection, and attempts to control something that, by nature, is unpredictable. The forest not only protected the secrets of the disappearance, but also exposed the limits of the investigation itself, showing that the most obvious truth isn't always what's right before our eyes. Can you see how all of this connects to the broader human experience? It's not just about crimes or disappearances. It's about how we deal with uncertainty, with the unknown, with that which challenges our perception of reality. Every person involved in this case, family members, neighbors, investigators, has undergone a silent transformation. The mindset of seeking immediate answers has been replaced by a deeper awareness that some truths can remain hidden for a long time, perhaps even forever. The impact goes beyond the physical evidence. The feeling of helplessness, the frustration of unsustainable decisions, the weight of walking in terrain where every clue could be a mistake, all of this creates an environment where the mind is forced to work in ways that are often uncomfortable. This is where the story gains layers. The forest is not only the setting for the disappearance, but a catalyst for psychological tension, reflection on justice, and the realization that reality is often more complex than we care to admit. And it's in this complexity that the narrative becomes truly captivating. Every tree, every shadow, every distant noise seems to carry meaning. Every silence in the forest echoes like a whisper that no one can fully decipher. It's as if the place has held all the victim's secrets, all the fears of the last suspect, and all the human failings involved in the investigation, transforming the environment into a mirror of the mystery that remains unsolved. By observing this scene closely, we realize that the forest not only sheltered the disappearance, but also became a symbolic space for us to reflect on decisions, consequences, and the very nature of hidden truth. Every seemingly small detail, an abandoned trail, a misplaced object, a contradictory statement, begins to take on greater significance, revealing that what we see isn't always the complete reality. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this topic because there's a layer few people consider: the psychological effect of the lack of answers. Constant doubt, the feeling that something essential has been hidden, creates an invisible pressure that accompanies every thought about the case. It's a reminder that, in real life, not all mysteries have a clear resolution, and that the emotional impact of a disappearance can be as intense as the search for evidence itself. Each person involved, directly or indirectly, carries a fragment of this mystery. Every glance cast toward the forest is filled with anticipation and apprehension. Every story told about that night becomes an emotional record that complements and sometimes contradicts the material facts of the case. And it is at this point that we begin to realize that the disappearance in the forest is not just a crime story, but a narrative about impact, transformation, and the fragility of our perception in the face of the unknown. As we try to make sense of all this, inevitable reflections arise about how we would act in similar situations, about how human decisions, even small ones, can alter lives, and about how truth often hides in the subtlest details. The forest, then, becomes not just a physical space, but a reflection of the complexities of the mind, justice, and collective memory. And it is precisely this deeper layer that connects everything: the disappearance, the final suspect, the flaws in the investigation, and the silence of the law come together to form a picture that is not just about crime, but about emotional impact, human decisions, and the relentless search for the hidden truth. Every detail of the forest, every shadow, every silence contributes to a constant sense of mystery, that something essential remains hidden, waiting to be discovered. Comment there. I'm on this journey too. Have you ever stopped to imagine how a single moment can completely change a life, while simultaneously leaving invisible traces that defy the comprehension of everyone around? The disappearance in the forest began so mundanely that no one could have predicted the chaos that would follow. The victim was doing what seemed ordinary, a simple routine, something many do without a second thought, and yet that moment became a turning point that no one could erase. The clock ticked away hours that now echo in the memories of family members and investigators, as if every minute had been decisive. every second filled with possibilities that never came to fruition. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because understanding the exact moment of her disappearance is essential to comprehending the complexities that followed. The young woman was walking along a little-traveled trail, a path that led to a small lake hidden among dense trees. It was a space many considered safe, but in reality, it was surrounded by shadows, silence, and unknown possibilities. The last images captured by security cameras at a nearby business showed only a glimpse of her face, a seemingly banal image, but which, in retrospect, carries within it all the questions no one has been able to answer. The sense of urgency began to grow as soon as they realized something was wrong. A time that should have been marked by tranquility turned into pure tension. Phones began ringing incessantly. Family members roamed streets and trails, searching for signs, and every step taken by volunteers and police officers was filled with anticipation and fear. Every footprint in the damp earth, every broken twig, every sound coming from afar seemed to carry clues, but none were definitive. The realization that something essential had been lost almost imperceptibly began to create a tension that spread through everyone involved. As if the environment itself amplified the sense of alert, the digital records and witness accounts are fragments of this narrative. A friend who was with her that morning recalled trivial conversations, loose laughter, plans that seemed banal, but in retrospect became fragments of an incomplete puzzle. What seemed like a routine outing became a huge question mark, and each detail that emerged from these records heightened the feeling that something was out of place. The human mind tries to fill in gaps, and in this case each gap seemed larger than the last, revealing that we can't always immediately grasp the true impact of such a simple action. The disappearance, though localized to a specific physical space, quickly transcended the forest environment. The effect on family, friends, and even the community was immediate. The realization that someone could simply vanish without leaving any clear traces created a sense of collective vulnerability. Every news story, every comment, every suspicion that arose in neighbors' conversations transformed the narrative into something larger, deeper, and at the same time even more mysterious. It was as if every banal detail of an ordinary day had been charged with meanings no one could have predicted. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because understanding how the perception of disappearance is constructed also means understanding how our minds deal with uncertainty and unexpected impacts. The forest, which was once simply a space of nature and tranquility, became a stage of tension, fear, and constant vigilance. Every trail seemed to hide secrets, every shadow seemed suspicious, and every silence seemed charged with answers no one could grasp. The journey to understand the events of that day was not limited to physical searches. It extended to the analysis of decisions, human reactions, and each person's perception of the unknown. It's fascinating to note that, amid what could have been an objective investigation, layers of interpretation, imagination, and attempts to anticipate movements emerged. Every step taken by family members, investigators, and volunteers became a reflection on risk, chance, and decision. The sense of urgency, combined with the frustration of finding no clear signs, generated an emotional tension that was reflected in every gesture, every thought, and every strategy adopted during the search. And as we observe this starting point, we realize that the disappearance was not just an isolated event, but the beginning of a profound transformation for everyone involved. It opened doors to a series of revelations and questions that transformed lives, mindsets, and perceptions of reality. Every detail of the exact moment, every track, every noise, every unrecorded footstep began to create a mosaic of uncertainties that no one has been able to fully decipher. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, exploring how the behind-the-scenes details of the investigation and the initial records created a lasting impact. Every mistake, every distraction, and every overlooked observation became part of a complex web of events that shaped the entire subsequent narrative. The hidden truth, even if partial, began to reveal itself in unexpected ways, revealing that the disappearance was not just physical, but also psychological and emotional, leaving invisible scars that persist to this day. Comment there, that makes sense to me. Have you ever stopped to think how the first response to a disappearance can define the entire trajectory of a case? The moment the police received the report about the disappearance in the forest, a race against time began, a search that mixed logic, intuition, and constant pressure. Every detail that emerged, every footprint, every object left behind, became a crucial piece in a puzzle that no one knew quite how to put together. The tension was palpable, and every decision the investigators made carried with it the weight of potentially irreversible consequences. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because the initial investigation reveals much more than simple police protocols. It exposes behind-the-scenes details, human choices, and the complex intersection between physical evidence and subjective interpretations. Within the first few minutes, the teams began mapping the area, collecting statements, and searching for any sign of the victim. But even with this intense effort, the first contradictions emerged. Witnesses offered differing versions of what they had seen or heard, and seemingly small details turned into major enigmas. An object found on the trail seemed to indicate a direction, but mysteriously disappeared before being analyzed, raising doubts about the integrity of the investigation. Each initial clue seemed to open up new possibilities, while also creating new layers of uncertainty. Some investigators pointed to the possibility of an accident, others suspected deliberate action by third parties. And the human mind naturally seeks meaning, even in gaps and contradictions, trying to connect facts that often don't fit together perfectly. This duality between concrete facts and subjective interpretations made the search something that went beyond the physical realm and began to touch the psychological realm of both the investigators and the victim's family. The impact of these initial clues wasn't limited to what was physically present in the forest. Every decision made, every analysis conducted had lasting consequences. A preliminary report that seemed to indicate a safe path ended up raising new doubts. A statement that seemed clear when compared with other accounts generated more questions than answers. And it's fascinating to see how, in disappearance cases, small initial flaws can create a domino effect that persists throughout the investigation, influencing mindsets, strategies, and even public perceptions of the hidden truth. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, exploring how the initial investigation became a true study of human complexity. It wasn't just about tracking physical signs, but also about interpreting behaviors, observing patterns, and dealing with the unpredictability of human actions. Every choice the investigators made reflected not only their training and protocols, but also their mindset, intuition, and ability to deal with the unknown. And in this process, every failure, every questionable decision, and every missed clue contributed to the construction of a scenario in which the truth seemed to always elude them. Even in the face of the most dedicated efforts, the evidence collected in the first few days was a fragment of a larger narrative, simultaneously revealing clues and contradictions. A shoe found near the edge of the trail raised suspicions, but it didn't exactly match the victim's description. Partially erased footprints indicated movement in the area, but didn't clarify intentions or circumstances. And it's precisely this mix of concrete data and invisible gaps that creates a constant sense of mystery, transforming each discovery into a door open to multiple interpretations. The initial investigation also revealed how external factors can influence the perception of a case. The media began reporting on possible suspects. Theories circulated rapidly online and in the community, and each statement or interpretation took on a life of its own. And even with so much information, the truth remained hidden in subtle details, often ignored or underestimated. What seemed like a linear sequence of events became a complex web of possibilities, demonstrating that the reality behind a disappearance is never as simple as it seems. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because every clue, every testimony, and every initial piece of evidence reveals something about the nature of the hidden truth. The investigation became a true journey of discovery, transformation, and learning, showing that behind every object found, every contradiction observed, and every theory put forward, lies an emotional and psychological layer that influences everyone involved. The tension stemmed not only from the uncertainty surrounding the victim's whereabouts, but also from the impact these discoveries and initial failures had on the minds of those trying to connect the dots. And as we analyze these first hours of the investigation, we realize that the disappearance in the forest has become something bigger than any police protocol could have anticipated. Every trace, every seemingly trivial detail, every contradiction between accounts forms a mosaic of human complexity, decisions, and consequences. It's a reminder that truth is often not linear, and that understanding a case like this requires not only attention to the facts, but also empathy, reflection, and the ability to deal with uncertainty. Comment there. I'm on this journey too. Have you ever stopped to think how the presence of one person can completely change the perception of a case, even without concrete evidence? At the center of this entire mystery was him, the latest suspect, the name that surfaced in the investigation and carried with it a shadow no one could ignore. From the beginning, there was something about him that commanded attention, a set of attitudes, looks, and gestures that seemed to contradict any simple narrative. His relationship with the victim was not trivial. They had known each other for years, sharing ties that ranged from cordial to distant. And this closeness made the suspicion even more disconcerting. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because understanding who he really was leads us to explore not only the case itself, but the complexity of human behavior, perception, and decision-making. The final suspect had a seemingly ordinary routine, but his actions before and after his disappearance raised questions that spanned different areas of the investigation. Small details, an absence at odd hours, subtle contradictions in statements, hesitations that seemed normal, were analyzed and reinterpreted as new clues emerged. The human mind tends to seek patterns and meanings, and in his case, each pattern raised new hypotheses, each gesture becoming seen as potential evidence. The impact of this presence goes beyond what can be recorded in documents or physical evidence. He became a central character in the narrative, not only because he could have been involved, but because every decision he made, consciously or unconsciously, influenced the perception of everyone around him. Investigators, family members, and even community members began to construct narratives about him, trying to understand motivations and intentions that in practice remained obscure. This constant attempt to decipher his actions revealed a fascinating aspect of human behavior, how we deal with contradictions and how we interpret attitudes that defy our logic. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because it is precisely at this point that the case becomes a study in mindset, impact, and unexpected revelations. The investigation began to analyze not just the facts, but the background to the suspect's life, social relationships, daily behaviors, previous decisions, and small actions that could indicate behavioral patterns relevant to the case. Every conversation, every averted glance, every hesitation began to be interpreted through the lens of suspicion, creating a domino effect of analysis, speculation, and doubt. And the more one investigated, the more one realized that the line between concrete evidence and subjective interpretation was tenuous, often imperceptible, and yet crucial to constructing the case's narrative. The final suspect wasn't just a figure of interest to the police. He became a focal point of the story, a symbol of how the hidden truth can remain hidden even when all attention is focused on a single individual. His actions, however trivial they might seem, began to be read as signs of possible involvement. Small contradictions in his statements were amplified, reinterpreted, and discussed by experts, creating a complex web of possibilities and hypothetical scenarios. Every detail, every hesitation, every silence began to carry strategic weight within the investigation, even though no one was entirely certain what was relevant or not. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this topic, also exploring how social and emotional perceptions of the suspect contributed to the complexity of the case. Community pressure, the victim's family's anxiety, and media expectations shaped how the suspect was perceived. Behavior that might have been considered normal in another context became interpreted as suspicious. An everyday pattern of life became a potentially revealing narrative, and his every action was carefully analyzed. This dynamic shows how a disappearance not only affects the physical evidence, but also builds layers of interpretation, judgment, and emotional analysis that accompany everyone involved. The effect of this constant attention also had a direct impact on his decisions and the narrative of the case itself. Each interaction, each questioning from the police or the media seemed to slightly alter the way he behaved. It was as if the weight of external expectations transformed the way he presented his own attitudes, creating a tension between his private life, external interpretations, and the role he had become unavoidable in the story of the disappearance. This tension, in turn, further fueled the perception of mystery and the feeling that something important remained hidden, even in the face of so much investigation and analysis. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because understanding the complexity of the final suspect also means understanding how justice, perception, and reality can collide. The way he was investigated, the clues interpreted for or against him, and the contradictions in his testimony open up space for reflection on human decisions, on the flaws and successes of investigative processes, and on how small actions can become central points in a puzzle. Every detail of what he said, did, or didn't do became a thread that could lead to the truth or raise new questions, demonstrating that in complex cases, reality is often multifaceted and resistant to simple explanations. And as we observe this central figure in the case, we realize that he represents more than suspicion. He is also a reflection of the decisions, mindsets, and interpretations that inform the entire investigation. His story intertwines with the disappearance, the investigators, and the forest itself, creating layers of meaning that overlap and defy any attempt at a quick conclusion. Every detail, every hesitation, and every shadow of doubt is part of a larger mosaic, where the hidden truth blends with human perception and the subjective interpretation of what really happened that night. Comment there. That makes sense to me. Have you ever stopped to think how the silence of the law can be more eloquent than any testimony? In the case of this disappearance in the forest, the flaws in the investigation emerged not just as minor slips, but as deep fissures that opened the way for an even more complex web of mysteries. Every piece of evidence that disappeared, every statement that changed its version, every mistake made by those responsible for the case left invisible but lasting marks on the perception of everyone seeking answers. And the effect of these failures wasn't limited to the investigation itself, but echoed in the lives of family members, researchers, and the community itself, transforming the journey to the truth into a nearly impossible maze. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because understanding these failures requires looking at the system as a whole, at human decisions, and at the inevitable gaps that arise when dealing with high-pressure, emotionally complex situations. From the beginning, there were details that went unnoticed, traces that should have been analyzed more rigorously, and evidence that disappeared without a clear explanation. Each of these losses had a direct impact on the investigation, limiting the ability to reach solid conclusions and opening the door to diverse interpretations. The sense of injustice, that something was being ignored or neglected, mixed with the fear and tension of everyone involved, creating a climate in which the truth seemed to slip through our fingers, even in the face of intense efforts. In this context, the justice system revealed its flaws. Procedures that should have ensured the integrity of the case proved fragile, inconsistent, or subject to interpretations that varied depending on who was analyzing them. An overlooked procedural detail could turn a promising lead into a point of doubt, and each contradiction in witness testimony further heightened the feeling that something was being lost along the way. The complexity of the system, combined with emotional and social pressure, created an environment in which critical decisions, often made under stress or without complete information, had profound and lasting consequences. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because looking behind the scenes of an investigation reveals a truth that often goes unnoticed. What appears to be a mistake isn't always a lack of skill, but rather a reflection of human limitations in extreme situations. Witnesses who change their versions don't necessarily do so out of bad faith. They can be influenced by memory, suggestion, or the tension of the moment itself. Documents that disappear may not have been deliberately destroyed, but rather poorly filed or neglected in the face of the volume of information. Every mistake, however small, creates a domino effect, influencing future decisions, interpretations of evidence, and the course of investigations. The emotional impact of these failures is another point that deserves attention. The victim's family, for example, had to deal not only with the physical absence of the person they loved, but also with the feeling of powerlessness in the face of a system that seemed incapable of offering clear answers. Each contradiction found, each missing piece of evidence, fueled frustration, fear, and distrust, creating a burden that extended beyond the time and space of the investigation. This psychological impact is part of the case's legacy, demonstrating that the absence of concrete answers affects not only the logic of justice, but also the human perception of security, trust, and justice. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this topic, exploring how the law's silence also influences the social narrative surrounding the case. The media, the community, and even experts began to interpret every failure as a possible attempt to conceal the truth, even when it couldn't be proven. Every hole in the investigation, every gap left by poorly executed procedures, fueled rapidly multiplying theories, suspicions, and questions, transforming the disappearance into an enigma that went far beyond the victim's physical disappearance. The hidden truth seemed to always be there, in plain sight, yet inaccessible, as if each attempt to reach it generated new shadows and new doubts. Gaps in justice and investigative failures also reveal something about decisions and mindsets. Those conducting a case face immense pressure, a constant balancing act between protocol and intuition, between swift action and detailed analysis. And it is precisely in this space that imperfections, lost evidence, and conflicting testimonies emerge. Every choice, every omission or hasty action creates effects that can last for years, shaping not only the perception of the case, but also the way future proceedings will be conducted. The transformation of the investigation into a labyrinth of uncertainty is a direct reflection of these human decisions and the limitations of the system. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because every error, every contradiction, and every missing piece of evidence not only complicates the case, but also invites us to reflect on the impact of human complexity in the search for truth. Justice, often idealized as perfect, reveals its weaknesses in extreme situations, and it is at this point that perception, intuition, and critical analysis become fundamental. The investigation, far from being merely a record of facts, becomes a narrative of choices, emotions, and consequences, where every lost detail, every contradiction, and every silence becomes part of the mystery surrounding the disappearance. And it is in this silence of the law, in these gaps that remain between evidence and interpretation, that the case reveals its greatest challenge: how to differentiate human error from hidden intentions, how to deal with the pressure of critical decisions, and how to interpret each fragment of information as part of a larger, albeit fragmented, truth. Each failure, each shadow of doubt, each lack of response is a piece that transforms the disappearance into something that goes beyond the fact itself, also becoming a reflection on justice, perception, and emotional impact. Comment there. That makes sense to me. Have you ever stopped to feel, even for a moment, the weight of living with an absence that has no explanation? The pain of those who wait for answers that never come is something that goes far beyond ordinary sadness. It's a profound sense of injustice, of powerlessness, of vulnerability that permeates every daily decision. In the case of the disappearance in the forest, the scars remain not only in police reports or newspaper headlines, but in the lives of those who had to deal with constant uncertainty. Each dawn without news, each frustrated attempt to obtain information, each hope that turned to frustration, all of this accumulated into an almost unbearable emotional experience, creating invisible but deeply real scars. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because understanding the human impact of a disappearance involves examining the complex emotions, decisions, and transformations that occur in those who remain waiting. The victim's family experienced not only the trauma of the disappearance, but also the constant struggle between hope and doubt. The silence of the forest seemed to reflect the silence of justice, each lost trace symbolizing the frustration of not finding answers. This emotional journey creates a constant tension, where the perception of time alters. Every everyday detail becomes charged with meaning, and every decision made is permeated by a silent fear that the truth may never come to light. The impact isn't limited to the emotional sphere. It infiltrates social life, interpersonal relationships, and even the very mindset of those who suffer. Small events that once seemed trivial become intensely interpreted, and any change in routine becomes a source of anxiety or expectation. The journey of coping with absence becomes an experience of internal transformation, where patience, resilience, and the ability to reflect on decisions and events are constantly tested. The feeling of injustice isn't just about the loss of the person, but also about the realization that the world doesn't offer clear answers, that the hidden truth seems to slip away before watchful eyes and anxious hearts. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, exploring how these human footprints connect with the impact of collective perception. The surrounding community, neighbors, friends, and even onlookers, observe, comment, judge, and unwittingly become part of the narrative of the disappearance. Every suspicious look, every comment, every theory floated on social media or in the media increases the family's emotional tension, reinforcing the weight of absence and the feeling that, despite so many efforts, justice remains distant. It's a reflection on how human decisions, interpretations, and the public narrative itself can shape the impact of a tragic event, amplifying or mitigating the pain of those directly affected. The human side of this case also reveals something about the complexity of memories and expectations. Each memory the victim experiences becomes more intense, each one more vivid and emotionally charged. At the same time, the lack of concrete answers creates a gap, a space where theories, assumptions, and unanswered questions multiply, transforming the experience of living with uncertainty into a continuous battle between memory and doubt. This experience not only shapes the emotional life of those who suffer, but also influences mindsets, future decisions, and how they deal with their own perception of justice and truth. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because the impact of a disappearance cannot be measured solely in facts or statistics. It manifests itself in the internal transformations of those who remain, in the emotional journey each individual goes through as they deal with the mystery, in the building of resilience and at the same time, in the constant struggle against feelings of powerlessness. It's a revelation about how tragedies like these shape our perception of life, reinforce values of empathy, and raise questions about ethics, responsibility, and each person's role in the search for truth. The weight of living without answers also highlights how collective memory is shaped by silence and uncertainty. Every discussion about the case, every speculation, and every attempt to understand the disappearance contributes to a narrative that goes beyond the physical event, creating a lasting impact on the perception of what is right, fair, or plausible. The feeling of injustice does not fade with time. It transforms, adapts, and remains a constant reminder of human vulnerability in the face of the unknown. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, reflecting on how the scars left by tragedies like these are actually a form of silent learning. They force us to question, to ponder decisions, responsibility, the fragility of life, and the importance of paying attention to the small clues that can transform our understanding of a mystery. Every emotion felt, every tear shed, and every night of anxiety is part of a process of transformation that, while painful, reveals much about human nature, the impact of experiences, and the depth of what it means to deal with the unknown. And it is in this space between pain, hope, and uncertainty that the story continues to unfold, showing that disappearance leaves not only longing, but also a series of questions, reflections, and changes that remain in the memory of all involved, shaping perceptions, decisions, and the very understanding of what is true. Comment there. I'm on this journey too. Was the final suspect truly guilty? Or was he just another missing piece in this dark puzzle the forest has been hiding for so long? This doubt, so simple in its form, becomes almost tangible when we allow ourselves to delve into the behind-the-scenes of this case. Every detail, every decision, every lost or altered piece of evidence contributes to the construction of a scenario where the truth skillfully hides, almost as if playing hide-and-seek with all who dare seek. It's fascinating and, at the same time, distressing to see how a single point of uncertainty can generate an entire chain of possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because it's not just about discovering whether he was guilty or innocent, but about understanding the impact of this lack of answers on how we perceive justice, truth, and even ourselves. The disappearance, the gaping investigation, the errors of the law, and the family's grief intertwine in a journey that goes beyond the simple crime. We're talking about silent transformations in the mindsets of those who observe, those who judge, and those who directly or indirectly participate in this enigma. It's a reflection on decisions that could have changed the course of events, on revelations that could have been uncovered but remained hidden, and on the emotional impact that each human choice has on everyone involved. If we stop and think about it, every detail of this story, from the first traces to the final suspect, is a fragment of a larger picture, a piece of a puzzle that defies logic, perception, and even the patience of those seeking answers. The hidden truth reveals itself little by little, but not in the way we would like. It manifests itself ambiguously, challenging our capacity for understanding and leading us to question the very nature of what we call justice. Every contradictory testimony, every missing piece of evidence, every neglected action is more than a failure. It is a reminder of how complex and unpredictable life and human decisions can be. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, exploring how the perception of guilt or innocence is shaped by our own experiences, beliefs, and expectations. The latest suspect has become a symbol of uncertainty, someone whose behavior, statements, and attitudes have been analyzed through multiple lenses, but always with the shadow of doubt hovering over each interpretation. There is an implicit truth in all of this. The reality of a crime is never composed solely of raw facts. It is also a mosaic of decisions, emotions, interpretations, and consequences that intertwine in ways that often escape simple logic. The mystery of the forest, with its dense shadows and nearly impassable paths, is more than a physical setting. It's a metaphor for the human mind facing the unknown. It's there that our own limitations are revealed, our tendency to seek patterns where none may exist, and our need to find answers even when they may never emerge. Each attempt to reconstruct what happened, each analysis of evidence, and each speculation about the final suspect are reflections of a complex emotional and mental journey, blending intuition, perception, fear, and curiosity in doses that together create an almost hypnotic effect on those who follow the story. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this topic because it is precisely in this space of uncertainty that the human impact manifests itself most powerfully. The family, the investigators, the community, and even us, the spectators, are touched by the same feeling that something essential is missing, that a vital piece of the puzzle has been displaced or hidden. This void provokes reflection on how we deal with decisions and consequences in our own lives, on how justice is interpreted, and on the importance of considering the behind-the-scenes, the small flaws and details that, at first glance, seem insignificant, but which, in fact, shape the entire narrative. Every shadow, every uncertain step within the forest and within the investigation itself reinforces the feeling that truth is something malleable, that it can be manipulated by perception, time, or simple chance. The final suspect in this context ceases to be merely an isolated figure and becomes a symbol of all the gaps, all the doubts, and all the mysteries that remain unsolved. He represents what we cannot control: the consequences of human decisions, the impact of systemic failures, and the complex emotions that surround each individual touched by this story. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because reflecting on the final suspect also involves reflecting on ourselves. How do we react to the unknown? How do we interpret the hidden truth when it presents itself in a partial or contradictory way? What decisions and judgments do we make without having all the information? And how does this influence our perception of justice, guilt, and impact? These questions transform the narrative into a reflective experience, inviting each person to observe not only the crime itself, but the layers of complexity it reveals about human behavior, choices, responsibility, and emotional transformation. And it is precisely at this point that the story continues to challenge us, leaving doubt alive and active, provoking questions about every action, every decision, and every lack of response. The forest and the case remain a space for reflection, where every detail, every shadow, and every suspicion connect with our own experiences, fears, and curiosity. Perceiving the mystery is transformative because it forces us to grapple with the impact of uncertainty, the strength of emotions, and the very complexity of the hidden truth. Comment there. That makes sense to me, and if you've made it this far, it means you truly connected with this story and all the layers of this mystery that permeate the forest and the minds of those who observe. That's why I want to invite you, in a light-hearted way, to continue this journey with me. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future content, because here we will continue exploring cases that challenge logic, perception, and emotion, always with the depth and attention to detail that makes all the difference. Leave a comment here that shows you were there for every moment. Something like, "I'm with you until the end," or "This message was for me." Seeing each comment is like feeling that the story didn't just stay on the screen, but that it touched those on the other side. And this connection is precisely what keeps this space alive and full of relevant content. And if you felt truly engaged with everything we discussed, give this video a like. It's not just about numbers. It's about recognizing the exchange, attention and reflection we share here together. Each like helps strengthen this space for investigation, analysis and reflection, demonstrating that this type of content makes sense and has value for those seeking more than just superficial facts. There's a video here that complements this topic, so click and follow along with me there. It will delve even deeper into these questions, bring new revelations, and certainly keep that sense of curiosity and discovery alive. The journey doesn't end here. It continues, and every detail we explore together makes all the difference in how we understand these mysteries.